Honestly, I must say thank you once more for always being there and waiting honestly with excitement to be part of the program Law and You. We're here again and we are leading you into another insight on what we're going to be looking at today. My name is Philip Omogupo. Last week we had issues on the marriage under the act, and we had the legal practitioner in the person of Dan Osaogbege, who is the managing partner of Noah Attorneys based in Benin City, Nigeria, and it took time to really elucidate that concept. Well, we could be having a Dan Osaogbege same time next week as we look into those areas or more openings in Law and You. And of course, today, we will be looking at the fundamental human rights. You agree with me, it is quite a very important phenomenon, a concept that we must all try to understand and find a way to enforce or find a way to make sure that the breaches involved in the fundamental human rights of every citizen is properly addressed. And today, joining me to discuss this is a legal practitioner, Emmanuel Obakpolo. Thanks for coming, Emmanuel.
Good afternoon, Nigerians. Good afternoon.
All right, the sound of fundamental human rights, it speaks a whole lot. And can you attempt a definition of what the fundamental human rights are and what constitutes the human rights?
Yes, human rights, but not fundamental. When it is fundamental, it simply implies there is no restriction.
Oh.
It's not limited. It's not tied to any condition. But when you say human rights, it means that there's a restriction. There are conditions upon which that right could be trampled upon. Now, what are human rights?
But human rights should be fundamental.
In this dispensation, this epoch, and in the world of today, even that of yesteryears, there is no fundamental human rights. Though some propagandists of the principle have argued that it should be fundamental human rights. But however, upon subjecting it to some tests, reasonable tests, the natural law, and other principles, it was discovered that it cannot be fundamental. Rather, it is human rights.
Okay, because of a whole lot of issues.
Yes, conditions.
To be overwhelmed by.
Yes. Now, when you look at human rights are those rights that any person or persons are exercised at any given time. They could be natural, they could be expressed, they could be implied, they could be philosophical, they could be taught, they could be documented, just as we have today in Nigeria, where we have the constitution that encapsulates the rights as available to every citizen of Nigeria. And these rights are specifically provided for in sections 33 to 41 of the extant constitution. And section 46(3) of the extant constitution provides that where these rights are trampled upon or violated or abused, that the person, the victim now, can approach the court to enforce these rights. So I think that is where we should take it from.
Okay, thank you for taking time to give it a head start, most especially as you mentioned of the fact that fundamental human rights seems to be stifled. And so we just leave out the fundamental and address the human rights.
Yes.
But well, the administration of justice, under the administration of justice in Nigeria, the human rights are really, really sacrosanct and are well recognized and hence entrenched in the 1999 Constitution, as we have it, as amended. Now, let's look at the aspect of right to life, for instance.
Yes.
Is that right not what belongs to the citizens? And under what circumstances can we say that can be under threat and how it can be addressed?
Like I did say from the outset, Section 33 provides for right to life. And that law is sacrosanct, meaning every living Nigerian has
Right to live.
right to live, and he or she can exercise that right. However, the sections that provides for those rights, the Constitution and other laws that embrace the rights to every Nigerian also look at it that where there could be conditions
Exactly.
upon this right could be trampled upon, like I did say. For instance, where there is an arrest, an attempt to arrest, or a process to arrest, and the person who is to be arrested choose or attempt to resist the arrest, and there is an application of force, that right can be taken. Also, where there is a declaration.
That right can be taken. What right? Right to life?
Right to life.
Because he is resisting arrest?
Yes.
What makes you say that?
Resisting.
That would make sense.
Resisting.
Why don't you just arrest the fellow? No matter how you do that, you get him arrested with the use of force, but without taking life.
The application.
We're talking about right to life.
If the application of that force,
Okay.
it depends on the degree of the application of that force. That right can be taken. That does not mean that the person or persons or agency who did that will not face the music. That does not mean that.
Okay, but that again cannot be denied the citizen or the human being that has that right to life. Because no matter what must have transpired, a man is presumed to be innocent until he is proven guilty. And that must be in the law court. And so even if the law enforcement agent has to arrest, they should arrest in a way that that right to life is preserved. At what point can you say
it depends on
unlimited?
It depends on the degree of resistance.
Oh.
It depends on that.
And most especially when such a person is found with weapons, that
Good.
also, expose the liberty of life again of the law enforcement agents.
Good. So you can see there you are giving answer, you are providing solution. So, right to life, those sacrosanct, there are still conditions upon which that right can be trampled upon. Take for instance, the declaration or the order of a court judgment. Maybe a court of competent jurisdiction sentences that person to death.
Exactly. Most especially when it has to do with criminal prosecutions.
Good.
Where such a person was found to have killed somebody. I think that's the only reason why such a life or such a right can be taken from such a person. If at the point where the court proves it or goes beyond reasonable doubt that the person in question, the suspect in question, is guilty of killing someone else, or capital punishment can now be served on that.
That is not only the condition.
Okay. So what?
Also, in a situation where a state of emergency has been declared and there is an announcement or a notice that nobody should come out, stay indoors.
A state of emergency by the government?
Yes.
Not by unknown gunmen?
No. And the person, the victim, chooses to go out and is shot and dies. What happens?
When there's a state of emergency, does it mean that anybody that comes out during curfew is shoot at sight? Because the most times when we see such pronouncement, it doesn't end up shooting anybody at sight. It's only at a point where maybe such a person is resisting arrest and they see such a person to be holding a weapon and the person is making an attempt to use that weapon against the law enforcement agent. That is when it becomes a threat, and that is when the law enforcement agent can now apply self-defense technique to do whatever he wants to do. But we're going to expunge on that area. But let's see your reactions in that regard.
When a declaration or a notice before a state of emergency can be declared, it shows that there is already threat to peace of the people of that particular area. It shows there's already threat to peace.
So what you're saying that anything can happen?
To now protect the right to life is for a notice or a declaration of state of emergency. You get it? That's why, take for instance, the Okwama case we had in Delta State, where some soldiers were killed. And there was a reprisal by the military on that community. Mm-hmm. So many persons have lost their life.
But do you see that as right? Because that's quite different from what we're talking about.
Listen.
When a citizen has right to live, right to stay alive, at a point where that right can be threatened, is maybe when that citizen is found to be guilty by a competent court, like you just said, of committing an offense that's punishable by death. Otherwise, if such offense is not punishable by death, or if there is an emergency situation where there is a curfew, that doesn't give right to law enforcement agents when they see anybody and then they shoot aside. Because sometimes it could be persons who are on, emergency cases, like journalists, for instance, like doctors, for instance. They are already allowed to move even when there is curfew because of the nature of their jobs, the jobs they do. So I believe that law enforcement agents should be thorough in whatever they are doing, even in times of curfew, and not to shoot at sight.
You are not getting it. There is no deliberate taking of life.
All right.
It was the emergency that resulted to the taking of life.
Something must have led to it.
Are you getting it?
In the process of maybe
in that situation,
arrest?
In that situation,
yes.
Do we not say that a life cannot be taken? It can. But the aftermath in the enforcement of that right, it could come up later. It could be another episode of it. But the law in itself makes it clear that, yes, right to life is sacrosanct, but there are instances upon which that life
can be taken away from the citizenry.
You get it?
Okay.
And these are some of them we have mentioned.
Okay.
For instance, during an arrest, and the person is resisting the arrest, and the person is posing threats, then what happens? There could be a reaction.
Okay.
Which could now lead.
Let's also paint another scenario. A situation where a victim of armed robbery, for instance, is seen to be attacked by armed robbers, and in the process, through self-defense, he was able to kill one or two of the armed robbers, with whatever way he did it. Could you see that person as guilty of taking life, or since it was in the process of self-defense, he took that, then can be excused by the law court? At what point can you excuse such a victim of armed robbery case who is involved in killing one or two of those that attacked him? At what point can you excuse such a person of such offense or being committed against the person killed?
It must not necessarily be an armed robbery case.
Okay.
Where there is an invasion,
attack,
where there is an invasion on a dwelling place. Dwelling place means a living occupation where somebody lives. For instance, Mr. A's house, a person or a group of persons invades the house and there was threat to his life. He can use the defense of self-defense rather, to protect his own life and occupants of that dwelling place.
But whatever he does must be proportionate.
Whether
proportionate. For instance, the person attacking now is not even using a gun, using sticks, and then because you feel that he invaded your apartment or tried to attack you, and then you now had to use gun or a cutlass or a machete. against such a person, and in the process, such a person lost his life, would you say that is proportionate? Because
no.
I know it has to be proportionate before
yes.
such a person can be excused.
No. That's why the law makes it clear that it must be reasonable and there must be threat to that person's life or the occupant of that dwelling place. Once there is threat, then the defense of self-defense can avail him. Mm-hmm. But where, like you painted, the person comes with a stick.
With a stick.
And you use a gun.
That's not proportionate.
And you say, oh, he has invaded your dwelling place.
That's not proportionate.
No, that cannot avail the person.
So what will you call that? Will you call that murder or manslaughter?
It could be manslaughter, at most.
Okay.
It could be manslaughter. So right to life, those sacrosanct, but there are limitations upon which the person
enjoying those
persons rights. Can enjoy the rights.
There are limitations.
Yes.
All right. It's law and you, and we've been on fundamental human rights, although the lawyer here says that we should take away the fundamental because it seems society has not been seen under the surface or under the skies that can make that fly as fundamental human rights. Well, we'll leave that to settle. Maybe some other time we're going to raise it from the dust that we kept it and talk about it. But let's look at the aspect of freedom of speech, for instance. We know that everybody has got that freedom as long as it's not taken away from you by virtue of you, having incidents of disobeying the law court or the laws of the land. At what point can we say freedom of speech can be enjoyed? Is it without limit?
Freedom of speech, it just like all the rights have limitations.
So with
freedom of speech. And just now in our country, we have seen laws like hate speech. We have seen some other policies that has the coloration of law, but they are not law actually. They are mere policies.
To guide the limitless flow of freedom.
Yes. And when you look at freedom of speech, the germane question is, does it mean any person or persons can say whatever he or she likes?
Run into mouth anyhow?
The answer is a no.
Okay.
So, but however, where there are certain policies that appears or seem to trample on the existence of a people
from ventilating their views.
Yes. Then the right to freedom of speech can be exercised.
Okay.
Can be exercised in order to make those in government or the government to understand that, look, this and that is the pain of the people. Like we are doing here now. We can use this platform to make the government to understand that the Constitution provides for rights, right to life, rights of the people, human rights. So these rights must be seen to be observed and obeyed.
So what you are saying is that freedom of speech is given to a point where it does not defame someone else's character. For the fact that one has freedom of speech doesn't mean that you can go ahead and defame somebody else's character. Yes. Otherwise, such a person will be held liable for such an offense.
For defamation or libel, as the case may be.
Okay, libel. Okay.
Yes.
So now let's look at the attributable punishments for such, like freedom of speech that goes to the point of defaming one's character or as a libel. What could be the offense for that?
Well, that is civil.
Relative anyways?
It's civil. It depends on the offender, the person who sees his or her right to have been trampled upon by virtue of the exercise of the freedom of speech by another. It can go to court, approach the courts to seek redress. And most times, we think that when a person approaches the courts on the exercise of his or her human rights.
Human rights, like you put it.
Are you getting me? Particularly freedom of speech being exercised by another. Most time we think is the remedy could be monetary. But that is not only it. It can also be that the person could be ordered to retract that statement, make public apology to the offender who goes to court to seek redress.
So it doesn't usually go with a fine. That's what you're saying.
It can.
It can.
If the offender seeks for that, if he approaches the court and asks for a monetary compensation, it depends on how the person is able to convince the court.
Okay, so are you saying this does not lead to prison sentence?
No, it's civil.
Okay.
It is where the court has, upon the evaluation of the facts, figures, and principles of law, and the court now comes out with a judgment. And the judgment debtor now violates the order of court. Then the court will not allow that. The court will feel being limited, being deprived of the powers of the court.
All right.
And when the judgment creditor now approaches the court, wherein we say we file from 48 and 49 for committer, that person could be committed to prison.
Okay.
That is where it will now become criminal, where it violates the order of court. But with the principles that guide freedom of speech, the exercise of freedom of speech, wherein a person approaches the court, it is a civil matter.
All right, we're still on you, but I want to delve into a very sensitive issue that has to do with the citizens' rights as regards the government that is administering policies, implementing policies, being in charge of affairs and governance. Now, a taxpayer's money is basically used for infrastructural development. Am I correct? Mm-hmm. And when that taxpayer is denied of this reconstruction or rehabilitation of roads, does that not dent his right to such infrastructural development, being that he is also paying to the government to make sure that he's able to enjoy such benefits or such gestures, which are not really kind gestures anyways, because it's the taxpayer that is really doing this. And so if the common patrimony is used by the government functionaries, they are only giving back to what the society gave them to do. So at what point can we say is the right of the citizens to demand from the government all of this when it comes to infrastructural deficit in the educational, health sector, and other sectors, most especially as it applies to health sector, for instance. A lot of persons have died as a result of not being able to access some facilities in the hospitals, of which they are already paying their taxes towards. So how do you explain this in 2 minutes, as we call it a wrap?
Yeah, when you look at that, that is not provided for in chapter 4 of the Constitution, because chapter 4 of the Constitution
that's
provides for human rights.
Okay.
But however...
So you don't put this under human rights?
No, it cannot be.
So what does it
However, chapter 2 of the Constitution embraces principles like this.
Okay.
And
but are these not rights?
It will
are these not natural rights?
They are not. They are not provided for in the Constitution, as in chapter 4 does not capture them.
Do you see that as a
chapter 2? Yes, but chapter 2 does. And chapter 2 now titles it Direct Principles of State Policies.
Okay.
And you know the drama? The Constitution provides for them, they are non-justiciable, meaning you cannot seek redress in courts.
Are you serious?
Yes.
Could that be seen as a deliberate act to make such silence?
It is. However, technically, you can, a smart lawyer can tie it
And
to
demand for
Chapter
those
4.
rights.
To Chapter 4.
To demand for those rights.
Particularly where it threatens the existence of the persons, of the victims.
Most especially as it has to do with the right to life, where a lot of persons' lives have been lost as a result of this. So we could be tying this at same time next week if we have the opportunity to do so. Big thanks.
Let me
Emmanuel
quickly say this. There is a case.
Yes.
John Agbemre and others, and SPDC and others. The lawyer was smart enough to tie it, and they got judgment at the court of first instance. But upstairs, they didn't succeed.
All right, thank you so much for being part of this. Well, you got the numbers there on the screen, and it's for you to react to all of this. And as we see your reactions, as you pouch them or you call the numbers on the screen, it will go a long way to help us to elucidate this, probably in the next episode that I'll be pointing out to you. From Philip Omo Gupo, it's goodbye.